It was a quiet summer evening when three friends, Jake, Emily, and Chris, decided to take a walk in the woods behind their neighborhood. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the ground. They had been walking for hours, talking about school, life, and everything in between. The woods were thick with trees, and the path they followed was narrow and winding. They didn't notice when they strayed off the main trail. "Are we lost?" Emily asked, looking around nervously. Jake, always the confident one, grinned. "No way. I know these woods like the back of my hand. We'll be fine." But after another few minutes, the path started to feel more unfamiliar. The trees grew taller, their branches twisting in strange shapes, and the air seemed to grow colder. "Hey, look!" Chris suddenly pointed toward something ahead. "What's that?" Through the trees they could just make out the shape of an old run-down building. It looked like an arcade. The paint on the walls was peeling, and the windows were dirty and cracked. A rusty sign hung above the door, barely readable. "Is that an arcade?" Emily asked, her voice filled with curiosity. "Yeah, it looks like it," Jake said. "I haven't seen this place before. It must have been abandoned for years." Chris raised an eyebrow. "This place is creepy. Are we really going in?" Jake shrugged. "What's the worst that could happen? Let's check it out." Despite their doubts, the friends moved toward the arcade. The door creaked loudly as they pushed it open, and they stepped inside. The smell of dust and old machines hit them immediately. The room was filled with rows of arcade games, some with broken screens and others covered in dust. A few flickered with weak lights, casting eerie shadows on the walls. It was as if the arcade had been frozen in time, abandoned long ago but still somehow alive. "Whoa, this is so cool," Jake said, walking toward a pinball machine. "Look at this old stuff." Chris hesitated. "I don't know, guys. This place feels off." Emily shivered. "Yeah, it's kind of creepy. Maybe we should leave." But before they could turn around, the sound of a machine turning on echoed through the room. A nearby arcade game buzzed to life, its screen lighting up with strange symbols. "Did you see that?" Emily whispered. "The game just turned on by itself." Jake didn't seem worried. "It's probably just an old machine glitching. Let's try it." He pushed a coin into the machine, and the game started. The screen showed a dark, creepy forest with strange creatures lurking in the shadows. As Jake started to play, the room around them seemed to get colder. "This is weird," Jake muttered, pressing buttons. "It's like the game is controlling itself." Suddenly, the machine made a loud noise, and the screen flickered. The creatures on the screen seemed to move closer to the player's character, as if they were about to attack. Jake tried to press more buttons, but nothing worked. He glanced around, realizing that the other games had also turned on. The whole arcade was alive with the sounds of beeping machines and eerie music. The lights above flickered, casting an unsettling glow over everything. "Okay, this is getting too weird," Chris said, his voice shaking. "We need to get out of here." But as the group turned to leave, the door slammed shut with a loud bang. "Let us out!" Emily shouted, trying to open the door, but it wouldn't budge. Jake tried the door too, but it was stuck fast. This isn't happening. This can't be happening. Suddenly, the machine started to make strange noises. High-pitched beeps, crackling sounds, and a low rumbling growl. The air grew heavy, and the room seemed to close in around them. "We're trapped," Emily whispered, her eyes wide with fear. "Stay calm," Jake said, trying to reassure her. "We just need to figure out how to open the door." But as he looked around, he noticed something even more terrifying. The screens on the arcade machines began to show faces, faint at first, but then clearer. They were faces of people, teens, just like them. Some were smiling, while others looked terrified. But one thing was certain. These people were trapped inside the games. "Oh no," Chris said, backing away. "This isn't just a game. This is something else." A voice suddenly echoed through the room. It wasn't coming from any of them, but from the machines. "You have entered the arcade," the voice said, low and menacing. "You must play to survive." The lights flickered again, and the room seemed to stretch. The walls seemed to get taller, the arcade games growing bigger, their screens flashing wildly. Jake grabbed Emily's arm. "We have to find a way to escape. There's got to be something here." But as he looked around, he realized that they weren't alone anymore. Figures began to appear in the shadows, shapes that weren't quite human, but something darker. They were moving toward them slowly, creeping out from behind the machines. "Run!" Emily screamed. They dashed toward the back of the arcade, but the door remained locked. As they ran, they could hear the footsteps of the figures getting closer, and the eerie voice repeated, "You must play to survive." The friends didn't know what the voice meant, but they knew they had no choice. They had to find a way to play and win. Jake spotted a machine at the far end of the room. It was different from the others. The screen was cracked, and the buttons were worn out. He walked toward it cautiously, his heart pounding. "Let me guess," Chris said, out of breath. "Another game." "Yeah," Jake said, staring at the machine. "But this one looks different." As Jake pushed the start button, the screen flashed brightly. The game came to life, showing a dark, twisted version of the arcade. The characters in the game looked like they were struggling, trapped inside, trying to escape. "These people," Emily said softly. "They're the ones from the other machines." Jake pressed the buttons, trying to control the game. The characters in the game started moving, and the goal was clear: escape the arcade. But the challenges were terrifying. They had to navigate dark hallways, avoid shadowy figures, and solve puzzles. It felt as though the game was alive, with the players' fates tied to the outcome. "Emily, can you help me figure this out?" Jake called out, his fingers slipping over the buttons. "I don't know how to beat this thing." Emily nodded, her mind racing. "Maybe we need to avoid the figures. Don't let them touch you." The figures in the game looked like the dark shadows in the arcade. Some were tall, some were short, but all of them were terrifying. They moved closer and closer to the game's characters. The tension was building with every second. Jake's hands trembled as he tried to move the character through the maze. "I can't do this alone." Chris stepped up, looking determined. "We have to finish this or we're stuck here forever. I'll help." Together, they managed to guide the characters past the shadowy figures. It was the hardest thing they had ever done, and with every near miss, the tension grew. Then, they finally reached the last part of the game. The screen flashed, showing the exit door. But just as they thought they had won, the door slammed shut on the screen. The characters were trapped again. "We're so close," Emily shouted. "There has to be a way out." "Wait," Chris said. "Look at the screen. It's asking us to solve one final puzzle." Jake leaned in, his eyes wide. "What do we have to do?" The puzzle was simple but eerie. It was a choice between 3 buttons, one red, one blue, and one green. A message appeared. "Choose wisely. One path leads to freedom. The others lead to darkness." "Which one?" Emily asked, her voice shaking. Jake stared at the buttons. Something about the red button felt wrong. The blue one looked like it could be the answer, but the green, it felt different. He reached for the green button. The screen flashed, and then the arcade was silent. The machine stopped making noise. The air was still. Slowly, the door creaked open. "We did it," Jake said, his voice filled with relief. The friends rushed toward the door, running as fast as they could. The arcade was fading behind them. They didn't look back. When they finally reached the safety of their neighborhood, they stopped to catch their breath. But as they glanced toward the woods one last time, they realized that the arcade had disappeared. It was as if it had never been there. "Was that real?" Emily asked, trembling. Jake didn't answer. He didn't know. That night, as they lay in bed, Emily glanced out of her window. For just a second, she thought she saw the flicker of a game screen glowing in the distance. But when she looked again, the woods were dark and still. They had escaped. But for how long?